You're Australian.
Australia. Yeah.
Hot on the bobby. Go ahead. What's
I'm
up?
a Maronite Catholic.
Okay. Now that means I can show your face. You're kosher.
Yeah. Sam, I have some questions about, no problem. So just in regards to SDA doctrine, every time I have,
Adventists, you mean?
correct. When I speak to them about theology, they often seem to make an artificial distinction between ceremonial law and moral law that I'm not sure is actually reflected in the Bible.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, that's a distinction that comes later.
Right. So do you mind explaining that just in the context?
Hot on the barbie. Well, yeah, ethical, moral injunctions are immutable, meaning when it talks about morality, morality is consistent, doesn't change. That's what they're saying. But the rituals, the ceremonial aspects can change. For example, circumcision, now it's baptism. You understand the distinction they're making?
Yeah.
So they're saying when it comes to moral, ethical commandments, don't sleep with your sister. That's not going to change.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas the ceremonies, right? The rites performed. In the Old Testament, circumcision. In the Old Testament, animal sacrifice. Well, that doesn't need to be binding. That can change. So now it's water baptism and it's the Eucharist. This is the distinction they're making. Now, I'm not saying that the distinction is not genuine, but when they tell you, well, the ceremonial aspects are done away with, but the moral injunctions are binding, then it comes down to, well, how do you know that this specific injunction is a moral injunction or simply a cultural injunction that's culturally defined, culturally normed, that is not necessarily reflective of God's immutable moral character? What do I mean? During the Old Testament period, God allowed multiple wives. Today, if you have more than one wife, what would you be?
Sinner, adulterer.
But that's a moral issue. But I thought morality doesn't change. You see, it's much more complicated than some people would like to have it. Because even certain practices that were allowed back then, you do them today, you'd be immoral and you'd come under God's wrath. So I cannot have 2 wives, 3 wives, or 4 wives, nor can I have a concubine. Allowed in the Old Testament. So when God allowed it, does that mean he was now sanctioning immorality? Well, see how complex it is? Or in the beginning stages of human development, when you only had Adam and Eve, you had no choice but to marry your sister, right? And you had no choice but to marry your cousin. Now, if you marry your sister today, what would that be?
Incest.
But at that time, you had no choice but to marry within the family, or there would be no human seed, no human race. You see, so even that issue of moral injunctions are irrevocable. Ceremonial injunctions, they can change. Well, hold on. Here are certain practices that were acceptable at that time. You can marry your sister, you can marry your cousin, you can have more than one wife, that now would be considered fornication or incest or adultery, and that's morality. That's not ceremonial.
Yeah. I guess just on the Sabbath itself, they say that falls under moral law because it's in the 10 Commandments. But
yes, that's it. Now, go ahead, brother. Make your point.
I was just going to say, in Hebrews 4, is that how the ceremonial aspect of that has changed for us Christians today?
Yeah.
Is that what that's?
I would say the implementation of that Sabbath observance has changed, just like sexual intimacy and what is appropriate sexual behavior has changed. You understand what I'm saying? So I don't call it ceremonial because they'll say, well, the 10 Commandments, they're all moral injunctions, aren't they? It's not that 9 of them are moral and 1 of them is ceremonial. So using their rhetoric, okay, Sabbath falls under our moral obligation because the 10 commandments, the 10 words, they're all moral obligations to God and neighbor. Why do I honor Sabbath? To show that I love God. Why do I avoid worshiping other gods and goddesses? To show I love the true God, etc., etc. Why don't I covet my neighbor's wife? To show that I love neighbor. So these are moral. Okay. Sabbath observance is moral in that it's an act that you do to show obedience to God, because to disobey, you're killing my ears, dude. Now, was that a moral or ceremonial injunction? Dude, you're blowing my eardrums.
I was getting texts. I muted it. Sorry.
All right. So, why is Sabbath considered a moral obligation? Because it is one of the means by which you show love for God and obedience to God. So if I do not love God, would that be immoral?
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, understood.
So if I fail to obey God, would that be immoral?
Yes.
So how do I show love and obedience to God? By keeping the Sabbath as he keeps it. So that's why they're telling you the 10 words, the 10 commandments are all moral obligations, injunctions. So I don't argue with that. But the real question is, do I have to follow the Sabbath observance as carried out by the Israelites to keep the Sabbath? Well, according to New Testament, no. I don't keep the Sabbath the way they do.
Yeah, I understand that. So we don't need to go into that.
Yeah, I don't need to go into that distinction.
Yeah. Okay. And just to clarify, you also are aware that they keep the food laws in Leviticus.
What?
The food laws in Leviticus.
And so, Acts 15 and throughout the New Testament, Gentiles are freed from much of the dietary prohibitions.
Yeah, no, I understand that. The question is, though, they always say that they don't keep the ceremonial law because it was nailed to the cross, but they keep moral law. Does that not backfire on them because these food laws are technically ceremonial?
Where does Colossians 2, because that's what we're referring to, 14 to 17, say it's only the ceremonial laws when it's talking about the written certificate of debt of moral, or I should say, of crimes committed against the law, and it specifically mentions Sabbath.
Well, it doesn't. But every time I bring that point up, they say, "Oh, well, it's the ceremonial law."
But okay, then they're just saying then the Sabbath falls under the ceremonial law, and it's been nailed to the cross. Because read it, continue reading. So let's go with their logic. Right here. So this is what they're referring to: nailed to the cross, having canceled Colossians 2, 14 to 17. The bond which stood against us with its legal demands, this he set aside, nailing it to the cross, right? That's their language?
Yeah.
Okay, but hold on, mister. He disarmed the principalities and powers and made a public example of them, triumphing over them in him. So now that the written charges of your crimes have been nailed and done away with, you now are free from anyone passing judgment and condemning you in what areas? Therefore, let no one pass judgment. See the therefore? Therefore, because he did this, no one can now judge you. Questions of food and drink. Okay, they'll say that's ceremonial. Or with regard to a festival, a new moon, or a Sabbath. So that means the Sabbath has been nailed. And therefore, you can't condemn me for not keeping the Sabbath.
Yeah.
As Israel kept it, right?
Yeah.
So they don't. Do they want their cake and eat it too?
It seems that way. Generally, just keep going in circles with them, but it's very
well,
clear.
then don't waste your time. But I'm using the verse that they used against you. Say, but wait, what is nailed to the cross is anyone condemning me for not carrying the Sabbath as delineated in the Old Testament. Just like you can't condemn me for what I eat if I'm not ethnically Jewish, or what I drink, because that has been nailed to the cross, and therefore you can't condemn me for things that I'm not obligated to carry out. But one of those things is the Sabbath. So why are you now binding the Sabbath on me?
Right.